The new Formula One season moves a significant step closer on Tuesday when the teams test their cars on the track for the first time in Valencia. 12 months ago, Red Bull were almost a second quicker than their rivals on the opening day of testing. But can they continue their dominance?
Will this be the car that keeps Sebastian Vettel number one in Formula One? Rule changes have meant significant revisions to last year's dominant RB7. Do expectations have to be revised as well?
It would be wrong to go into this season and expect 2011 to happen again, as in, getting into the lead early and then having a very big gap to the competitors in the championship. So I think it will be very, very tight this year.
Like every other 2012 car except McLaren, the new Red Bull features a stepped nose. Distinctively, theirs has a nose piercing, or rather a duct. However, it's at the car's rear where last season's champions faced their biggest challenge.
Difficult task. We've lost the exhaust technology with the restriction exhaust outlet position that we were able to develop and perhaps be ahead of the pack on over the last couple of years. And that's led to a big rethink over the winter.
We're always looking to improve. We're always looking in all areas to try and do better, and we can't control what our opponents do. We're up against some formidable opponents, and but we can only really focus on ourselves, and only when we get to Melbourne will we truly know where we sit compared to our rivals.
Last year's RB7 won 12 races and claimed pole position at every Grand Prix bar one. But while Vettel broke records, his teammate finished third in the drivers' standings, behind Jenson Button.
Off the back of last year, any sportsman or woman, when you don't, get the most out of the situation, you always want to come back and improve and do a better job. And the bar has been lifted very, very high in the last few seasons, and that's the challenge I'm looking forward to.
McLaren's sleek silhouette has been the standout design story of these 2012 launches. Nose-wise, Red Bull have gone with the pack. Will it help them stay ahead of it? Craig Slater, Sky Sports.
So the majority of teams preparing to test their new car in the morning. One team has already tried their new car on the Jerez track. Lotus put their E20 through its paces on Monday with a former world champion behind the wheel.
The Iceman is back. Kimi Räikkönen took the Lotus E20 out on the track at testing over 2 years after he left Formula One.
I missed racing, so then Formula One is the highest level of racing. So that's the reason. I did some racing in a NASCAR and it was good fun, so I wanted to back against the people racing.
He also spent time competing in the World Rally Championship, but once back on the track, the 2007 world champion looked like he'd never been away.
I have nowhere to compare. I was on my own, but I felt good in the car, and everything seems to. I was able, when I wanted to push hard, I was able to go faster. So just by feeling, I felt good in a test.
Does he still have the speed? Has he got any concerns at all about coming back after a couple of years away?
No. Don't worry. He still got the speed, and he's still there, and he's very professional.
Lotus launched the new E20 with their all-new driver lineup. Kimi is joined by Romain Grosjean, whose last Grand Prix race was also back in 2009. But this season, there will be 5 other world champions on the grid.
I think the people who looks Formula One from outside, they look different because there's so many world champions. But for as a driver, I don't think it makes any difference.
With 6 weeks to go until the first Grand Prix of the season in Melbourne, it's time to put all the work that's been done over the winter to the test on this circuit at 9 o'clock in the morning. Kimi's had a run out in the E20. Now it's time for the other drivers and teams to see what their 2012 cars can do. Rachel Brooks, Sky Sports, Jerez.
Formula One team has unveiled its new car for the new season, the STR7. It's a brand new driver lineup as well. Daniel Ricciardo and Jean-Eric Vergne were on hand to reveal the car in southern Spain. Ricciardo will give the STR7 its track debut at Jerez today.
I think back to Brazil, last race of last year. Doesn't feel like that long ago, and apparently we've had a big summer break, and summer for me in Australia, and had a lot of time off, but all of a sudden we're here again and back into business. So yeah, it does feel a bit back to school, and it comes around very quickly, but for me it's a new challenge this year, and and a big opportunity. So it's definitely a day of school I'm excited about. Not like it was 10 years ago.
Realistically, it would be nice to finish as many times as possible in the points. Then I think we have to see how is the car first compared to the other guys, and to have a more clear idea of where we could finish the Grand Prix.
It's an important day in Formula One. Testing begins in Jerez in Spain. Let's head there now. We can join Rachel Brooks. Rachel.
Yes, well, it's a little bit colder than it was yesterday. Foggy start to this morning as well. But this is it. This is the first day of testing, winter testing. The drivers get to get the cars out on the track and really see what they can do. They get to try the tyres as well because they've changed a little over the winter. And I'm very pleased to say I'm joined now by our pit lane reporter for the 2012 season, Ted Kravitz. Ted, thanks very much for joining us this morning. Bit of a chilly morning to start off with today. But how important is today for the teams?
Yes, it is. A bit chilly, and they didn't expect this, but it will soon heat up. It was 15 degrees here in Jerez yesterday. It's absolutely crucial. Today is effectively the first day back at school for all these teams. They built their new cars, they've designed them, but only on computers. They haven't had a chance to fully run them in anger as yet. So today will all be about shaking down the cars, and that means running systems checks, checking that the engine works, checking that it runs power through the gearbox, and checking that all the hydraulics and ancillaries and electronics work, because these cars are so complicated. Just one thing fails and the whole thing stops.
It is an important day. We saw yesterday one of the teams got a little run out, the Kimi in the Lotus yesterday, and is that any advantage for them at all?
Yes, Renault ran yesterday, Renault Lotus, whose trucks are just behind us here, and the Sauber team. They used a little bit of mileage that they're allowed to do yesterday for filming purposes, and that would have helped them because they already have a baseline understanding of their car. Kimi Räikkönen knows that the car works, and he knows that he has a basic setup that works for him. So he will be able to start this morning having already that knowledge that all the other teams won't. So that is a bit of a benefit for them. Having said that, the other teams will soon catch up.
We saw them launch their car yesterday. We've seen a lot of launches recently. Much is made of the cars. But realistically, how close are the cars we've seen at launch is going to be to the ones we see on the grid in Melbourne?
Well, unfortunately, most of them won't end up looking any prettier. They've got this little step on the nose. It's a feature of a new regulation. The nose has to be about 50 millimetres lower than they were last year. That means all the cars end up looking a bit like platypuses. You know, they've got this little odd nose at the front. Unfortunately, they're all going to keep that nose apart from the McLaren. But the interesting one we saw yesterday was Red Bull. They launched in a strange sort of online launch. We only got a few pictures of the car, but what's interesting, I think, for me today is to see what that car looks like in the flesh. The Red Bull will ostensibly look the same when we get to Melbourne. The McLaren, though, moving to them, as we said, they are one of the only teams with a sloping nose, not the one with a step in the middle of it. Looks much better. Does it work? Well, that's what these tests are going to mean for McLaren. They're going to find out whether they've gone the right way on car development or whether actually they're in the minority and they're going to need to change to one of these step noses.
We've seen red herrings in the past. McLaren, for example, last year reversed the exit of their exhaust between testing and between launch and when Lewis Hamilton took it out at testing. So have we seen some red herrings already, do you think?
I think we have, and the teams want to keep all their secrets under wraps for as long as possible because we're looking at it. That means all the other teams are looking at it, but all the other teams will know very quickly as soon as testing starts in about half an hour's time what everyone is doing. The example you say last year, that was a massive mistake by McLaren. They got it wrong in testing, and that's why these few days in Jerez and then the next two sessions in Barcelona will be so important. They need to understand whether they're going the right way, whether their season is going to be a success or a disaster. It's that simple.
All right, so thanks very much. Ted's going to be with us all day today. We are here in the paddock at the moment here at the Jerez circuit. We've got the hospitality to the right of us. We've got the trucks to the left. And the drivers who don't drive today, because only one of the drivers in each team will drive today, the ones that don't will be sitting in these trucks behind us and they'll be looking at the data ahead of when they get out on the track. But it's first day back for the teams here in Jerez. First day of winter testing.
Great. It's an important day in Formula One. Testing begins in Jerez in Spain. Let's head now and join our Formula One reporter, Rachel Brooks. Rachel.
Yes, Mike, and we're standing right at the exit of the pit lane here at Jerez at the moment. The cars are out on track, as you'll be able to hear very, very shortly indeed. And I'm pleased to say Ted Kravitz is with me once again, our pit lane reporter for the Formula One season in 2012. And Ted, we've seen some interesting moments already from this testing session this morning.
Yeah, so we've seen plenty of action. Jenson Button has just been out. We're still waiting to see the Red Bull, but first out was the Caterham. They've got the honour of being first on track in 2012 after a long winter. But we've already seen bits flying off cars, and a very brave marshal has just been out into the middle of this blue and white hatching to retrieve some bits of the Sauber, which flew off. It was just a small little winglet that hangs underneath their rear wing. Not a crucial bit to the performance of the car, but slightly worrying that it's already falling off after just a few laps. But Sauber will have the car back. They'll say, oh, bit of work there still to do. Maybe glue it back on and send some pictures back to the factory of a bit more quality needed in the design process.
What else can we expect to see from today? We saw the cars go out and do their installation lap, and now they've been out again. What will we expect to see before we get to lunch?
Well, it's warming up very nicely now, so the track temperature is warming up. That means the teams can get some representative lap times. So they wouldn't normally be racing in very cold conditions, so they need to wait until they've got nice hot track temperatures. So now I think we're seeing about maybe 5 or 6 lap runs from some of the top teams, and they'll come back in the garage, suggest some setup changes. The drivers will say, well, I feel maybe it's sliding at the back a bit. I want to change this, that or the other. And then they'll go out and play around with fuel loads. But the car just passing us at the moment is the Mercedes, and they're pounding round with last year's car. It's a very brave move from Mercedes. They're the only big team not to have brought their new car to this test. It might pay off with them. They say that it's given them more time to develop the new car. If it doesn't, that means that they're 4 days worth of development behind everybody else.
And also, they had the Pirelli tyres last season, but Pirelli have changed the compounds on all bar one of those tyres, so it's a chance for them to try those out as well on the track.
Yes, it's important for them to get a feel for the new tyres. The tyres have just got a little softer, so they're used to the feel of the tyre that they'll be testing here. I think really what today's about is just systems checks, making sure that everything is running on the car, making sure, as we saw with the Sauber, that bits don't start falling off it, and make sure that the driver is comfortable for the 3 days of hard performance testing we've got to come.
And also, we were talking earlier, the drivers that are out today, it's one from each team, although I know Mercedes have split it between Rosberg and Schumacher, the 2 sessions today. But what's the advantage of driving later in the week? Jenson's out for McLaren now, but Lewis Hamilton's going to get out on the track towards the end of the week.
Well, Lewis Hamilton has the advantage of driving on the 2 days later on in the week. That's because the track will have rubbered in, will get some good grip down, and also there's less of a chance that the car will break down. The car's more likely to break down for the first 2 days of the test when the team are still ironing out all the bugs. So you might argue that Jenson Button is at a slight disadvantage driving as he is the first 2 days for McLaren, as is Mark Webber for Red Bull. He's driving the first 2 days. Sebastian Vettel, the Red Bull world champion, is driving the second 2 days. So a little advantage at this early stage for Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel.
All right, thanks very much, Ted. We'll be speaking to you again later on today. But as the cars return to their garages here in the pit lane, they're discovering all sorts. We're discovering parts are falling off, but that'll soon be sorted out, I'm sure. Do join us later for more from here from Jerez.
Rachel, thank you. It's an important day in the Formula One calendar. Testing has begun in Jerez in Spain. Rachel Brooks is there for us. Rachel, over to you.
Yes, and we've come back down to the paddock now, so hopefully you can hear us a little more clearly. But as you can probably hear, the cars are still out on the track at the moment. I'm very pleased to say I'm joined by a very, very special guest this morning, 3-time world champion, Sir Jackie Stewart. Jackie, lovely to have you here. Tell us, this first day of testing, what does it feel like when you finally get to sit in that new car?
Well, I think, first of all, welcome to Sky, to Formula One, from my point of view. Early season testing is really the beginning of it all. These cars until yesterday had never turned a wheel, and if you think that it was designed, probably the design started to be laid down in about April or May, and when you think that they've never turned a wheel until they come all the way down to southern Spain and then go out on the racetrack, they did 10 laps yesterday. Luckily, no little fires, no little fuel leaks, no little water leaks or oil leaks. These are the things that they look for at the beginning of a season. So all of the teams, when you look down this great row of transporters, you realise that none of those cars have run before. So it's too early. I mean, right now, Kimi Raikkonen's quickest, but it's only just the beginning of the day, never mind the season.
We've seen some of the teams have been on Twitter saying that this is all about data collection today. That's what they want to do, and they'll look at the setups later. Is that pretty much it?
Well, it's called a shakedown. The initial driving's a shakedown. Then they've got to get into the fact of reliability. And most of the cars will have considerable modifications carried out before we go to Australia for the first Grand Prix. The drivers have got to get used to the cars. The characteristic of the car will be completely different than it was last year. So there's an awful lot to be done, and this is the first full day of it.
Well, let's look ahead to the season then. We've got a fascinating season ahead. 6 former world champions on the grid. If we can look at Lewis and Jenson to start with, I mean, what do you make of Lewis Hamilton's season last year?
Well, it was a difficult season for him. I don't think he was a happy boy during the whole year. Whether it was his own personal problems, social problems or whatever else, he wasn't the man he was the year before or the year before that. But he's got huge skill, and I've got no doubt he'll be back very strong. And the actual talent that the guy has is extraordinarily high. The biggest challenge that any racing driver or any sports person has is the mind management. And last year his mind management obviously went off track. So I think he learned a lot from that, and he's with a very good team, good people to help him. I think you'll see him back on form.
Both drivers, though, would have to be title contenders this season. How difficult is it for a team to have 2 drivers who can vie for that title?
Well, I think it is difficult, but, they're very competitive to each other. Jenson Button's at an age now, probably the best window of time for a racing driver, for a man, really. And when you get to your late 20s to your mid-30s, I think your ability and your way of doing things have just matured. There's a big difference in 5 or 6 years of growing up, and Jenson Button's growing up. So I see him as a real player now. When he's on form, there's hardly anybody better. He's smooth, he's clean, he doesn't spin off the track very often, he's well controlled, and the little grey cells work very well.
And what about the main protagonists this season? Do you think they will be the same as last season? Do you think it's a case of Ferrari, McLaren and Red Bull?
I think they are the 3 leading teams at the present time, and I don't think there's anybody just ready to take that over. Obviously, a major car manufacturer like Mercedes-Benz, and to have Michael Schumacher on the team, a lot is expected of them. But on the other hand, you've got, for example, the Lotus team with Kimi Räikkönen coming in and back into the sport. He wants to prove that he can do better in a comeback, if you like, than Michael Schumacher. The Renault team have been very successful as engine manufacturers. Now the Lotus team are still with Renault as an engine maker, and of course that team has won world championships before, and they know how to do it. Many of those same people in the factory and in the race team have been there throughout that experience. So this is a good team with a lot of integrity to it, and it really depends on how good the car is. And before this week's finished, we'll know much more about that, because I think not only does it take this few days to shake the car down, but we'll really probably have to take 3 or 4 races, Grand Prix races, to find out who's really got it together. Because if you turn the clock back a wee bit, last year Ferrari and McLaren started off very poorly, but of course came on as the season progressed. So let's wait and see.
All right, well, we look forward to it very much. Thank you very much for your time this morning, Sir Jackie, and enjoy the rest of testing here. And as you heard Sir Jackie say there, that it is Kimi Räikkönen in the Lotus who's got the fastest time so far, but as he says, it's very, very early days, and it doesn't really tell you too much at the moment. Everyone just testing those cars out this morning, and we'll bring you the latest later on.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks to Jackie for welcoming Sky. We are delighted to be there.
Now, it is a big day in Formula One. Testing for the new season has got underway in southern Spain in earnest. 11 of the 12 teams competing this year are at the Circuito de Jerez for a 4-day session. Marussia are the only squad not there. Preparations are being stepped up ahead of the season opener, which is at Albert Park, around the lake in Melbourne, in Australia on March the 18th.
Early season testing is really the beginning of it all. These cars until yesterday had never turned a wheel, and if you think that it was designed, probably the design started to be laid down in about April or May, and when you think that they've never turned a wheel until they come all the way down to southern Spain and then go out on the racetrack, they did 10 laps yesterday. Luckily no little fires, no little fuel leaks, no little water leaks or oil leaks, These are the things that they look for at the beginning of a season. So all of the teams, when you look down this great row of transporters, you realise that none of those cars have run before.
And
it is a big day in Formula One. Testing has begun in Jerez over in Spain. We can head back there now to join Rachel Brooks. Rachel.
Well, the sun's come out and it's certainly warmer than it was earlier on this morning. Now, we've had this morning session on this first day of winter testing and seen most of the cars out. Some Marussia aren't here yet. They were never going to make this first winter testing. But we have seen the HRT and Mercedes cars from last year going around the track. But we've seen plenty of other action too. And I'm joined now by Ted Kravitz from Sky Sports Formula One channel. And Ted, what else have you seen? What do you make of what we've seen this morning?
Well, it's been a busy opening morning of testing. We've seen Kimi Raikkonen, fastest of all in the Lotus Renault, and that's a great time for them. You can never tell with testing what's really going on because we don't know what fuel loads they're running. We don't know if they're running with extra bit of ballast or anything like that. But whatever, that's an impressive time from Kimi Raikkonen. Paul di Resta's currently running second, Scotland's Paul di Resta, in the Force India, so that's also a good time from Force India. But surprisingly, not much action from McLaren and Red Bull.
Yes, Red Bull didn't go out for a very long time this morning, did they? They were teasing everybody. And what have we seen from what they have been able to do so far? It's Mark Webber driving for them today.
Yeah, apparently Red Bull were waiting for new bits to arrive from the factory and they were working on the car all night. So it hasn't been smooth running for them already. Mark Webber's only 7th fastest at the moment. He's just doing some more systems checks and gathering data and starting really to understand the new car. Jenson Button, they've had a little problem with some burning on the floor. They're obviously a new exhaust layout for this year, and they've had a little bit of burning that I've spotted in the pit lane on the floor, just in front of the rear tyres. But that's usual, that's what happens in testing, and so McLaren will get that fixed pretty soon.
And finally, just to wrap up, I mean, from point of view, you do learn some this week. The teams will learn a lot more than we do, I'm sure. But in terms of Lotus, they must be pretty pleased. They've gone 50 laps now without any real problems on that car. That's got to be a really good day for them, surely.
It is, and especially good for Kimi Raikkonen. He's been away for 2 years. He's been trying all sorts of cars, racing in America, driving rally cars. He wouldn't have really known whether he still had it in him until he got to testing, got on the proper race tyres and had a go. And he's proved to himself and everybody else in Formula One that he's still got it.
Great, well, thanks very much for the moment, Ted. We do have this afternoon as well, full afternoon's testing here at Jerez, and we'll be keeping a close eye and seeing what the teams do and keeping you updated on Sky Sports News.
Very much enjoying it. Thanks, Rach. Now, the Formula One season is still over a month away, but today is crucial with the first of 3 tests getting underway. So let's cross back live to join Rachel Brooks in Jerez in southern Spain. Rachel.
Yes, and the afternoon sessions got underway. They've had their lunch and teams' cars back out on the track now. And I'm very pleased to say I'm joined by somebody who is incredibly busy today, but he has taken time out to talk to us. It's Mike Gascoigne, the Chief Technical Officer at Caterham. So, Mike, first car out this morning. How did you feel? It was a beautiful scene, wasn't it? The sun was up, it's burnt off the fog, and out came your car.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, a lot of man hours have gone into getting the car ready, so great to see it out on track for the first day of testing. First car out, which we always like to be, and it didn't break down, so it was a good morning.
Yes, what is the aim of today for you? I mean, everybody is just trying the cars out on the track for the first time. What do you hope to see and what do you hope not to see other than the breakdown?
Doing system checks, checking out the cooling, all the systems on the car, all the electronic system. We've got KERS fitted for the first time. So it's really just a systems check, running with lots of fuel rather than looking at anything to do with performance.
And Heikki's out in the car for you today. What has his lap times been like so far? I mean, are you pleased with how he's gone?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it all depends on fuel levels and who's doing what. But from the point of view, he's very happy with the car. We've made some changes to the setup. It's responded very well, starting to get a good balance, and we're already quite a bit quicker than we were last year, so that's a good sign.
And also, I know you've been tweeting today about the tyres. He's been out on the hard tyres, and you're just getting used to new compounds again.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're all new with the tyres. It's first day of running, so everything's very new. So taking it very easily, running on the harder tyre just to get these basic laps in for the systems check. Over the week, we'll try and go a bit quicker on some of the softer tyres.
Have you been surprised by any of the other cars you've seen? I mean, we saw the Red Bull nose yesterday. Have any of the cars surprised you at all this year?
No, I think we knew the trends with the noses. They'd all have these step noses because the rules forced you down that way. Obviously, we're taking the chance to have a good look at all the cars which have just been launched. Our aero boys will be checking what's going on in the pit lane. But yeah, it's just great to be out testing after all those sort of long cold months working in the office.
And what, ideally, would you like to have, what stage would you like to have got to by the end of this week?
Well, really just know that we've got a reliable car mechanically. We'll start to get some idea when we do some longer runs of the true pace of different cars. The more running we do, we can obviously start judging fuel levels. We want to be in the sort of second half of the midfield pack. I think we're looking good for that, but yeah, we'll have to wait and see.
And the season in general, whereabouts would you like to see your team finish?
We want to be scoring some points. We've been 10th the last 2 years, so you've got to look at the people who are sort of 8th and 9th, Toro Rosso and Williams, and that's who we'll be aiming at.
You've been having a good look at their cars today?
Good look at their times and their lap times, but yeah, we'll see over this. I mean, we've got 3 weeks of testing now here in Jerez and 2 weeks in Barcelona. We'll have some idea of where we're going to be. We've got a lot of updates coming, so yeah, we'll see.
All right, well, thank you very much for joining us, Mike. I know you need to get back into the garage as the first winter testing session continues here at Jerez. It's only day 1, but the cars are back out again, and we'll have more updates for you later on Sky Sports News HD.
And we are enjoying it. Thanks, Rachel. The 2012 Formula One season will see a number of redesigned cars to meet new rules. They include lower nose cones and different exhaust designs. The Lotus technical director says the test event in Jerez gives them a chance to see what they can get away with in their new look cars.
It's going to be interesting this year when we look at the whole grid, whether or not all of the exhaust solutions that have been put together appear to be respecting both the black and white part of the regulation and also the intention of the regulation. As regards our car, the solution we've gone for is relatively conservative in the initial period, and we'll have to see exactly where the dividing line falls between what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable.
Well, the 3-time world champion Sir Jackie Stewart joined us earlier from Jerez in southern Spain, where testing is underway right now. He believes that Jenson Button is likely to do better than his McLaren teammate Lewis Hamilton once again this year.
They're very competitive to each other. Jenson Button's at an age now, probably the best window of time for a racing driver, for a man, really. And when you get to your late 20s to your mid-30s, I think your ability and your way of doing things have just matured. There's a big difference in 5 or 6 years of growing up, and Jenson Button's growing up. So I see him as a real player now. When he's on form, there's hardly anybody better. He's smooth, he's clean, he doesn't spin off the track very often, he's well controlled, and the little grey cells work very well.
Of course, we'll keep you updated with all the tests too.
Now the Formula One season is still over a month away, but today is absolutely crucial with the first of 3 tests getting underway. So let's cross back live now to join Rachel Brooks in Jerez in southern Spain. Afternoon, Rachel.
Good afternoon, Simon. Yes, the testing session for this afternoon. Anyway, they've got about another 40 minutes or so out on the track here, an hour ahead of England, of course. And as you can hear, they are still going around in their 2012 cars. All the teams, well, Mercedes and HRT, who are running their 2011 cars. And I'm very pleased to tell you I'm joined now by the motorsport director from Pirelli, Paul Hembury. And of course, Pirelli, the only tyre supplier last season and this season as well. And Paul, how does this differ for you from a race week?
Well, it's a lot easier and there's no tension, although there's a lot of variety. You know, teams are difficult to follow because they're sort of doing a lot of work on setup, reliability work, and that means it's very hard for us to follow, trying to understand what they're doing and what influence it does have on our tyres.
What sort of demands do they make on you during testing?
Well, to be honest, I have to say this is the easier session, the first one, because they are more focused on their own setup and reliability. They'll be running around with the harder tyres, trying to get as many kilometres on those tyres, saving the softer tyres for later in the test sessions. You know, Barcelona 3, as we call it, will be the main one for them before they go to Australia. They only have 100 sets of tyres anyway, so they don't have unlimited supply, so they have to manage it as well.
And from your point of view at the moment, how important is it, from your point of view, it's very important, how important is a tyre to Formula One drivers? I mean, we saw Ferrari say last season that Felipe Massa couldn't get his tyres warm and he struggled with them. How important is it to a Formula One car?
Well, we made a big difference when we came to the sport last year. You know, we were the new kids on the block last year. You're here this year, but you know, it was all new for us when we came testing here. We made a big difference in the sense the tyres part of the strategy of the race weekend. You know, they wear out quite quickly. The driver has a big impact on how the tyres are used. So we brought ourselves into the play during the weekend, and that was a shock. They're used to it now, probably maybe too used to it. So we need to always keep thinking: do we have to bring in new things during the season? You know, we're starting off with an aggressive approach this year. We've gone to much softer tyres, which means they're going to wear out more. The driver's going to have to manage those tyres a lot more. We'll see, though, when we've really got an idea of these 2012 cars, how they're running, because everyone told us downforce will be less at the start of the year, but we've had a look at some numbers, and I think the engineers have done it again, and we'll be very close to last year's levels, although the Sao Paulo levels right at the start of the season.
What sort of feedback do you get? I was going to ask you that. You know, what sort of feedback do you get from the teams, and you obviously look at all the data they're bringing in as well?
Yeah, I mean, it is very early days for everybody, but we've already seen some wear levels of the tyres, and we've had warm-up. You mentioned Felipe Massa, and the warm-up levels seem to be very good for the harder tyres. That was an issue last year. A lot of teams suffered with the hard tyre last year. They couldn't get it into temperature. It was a little bit too conservative, so we went for a more aggressive approach, and the initial feedback's good. I haven't spoken to Felipe yet, so we'll have to check out what he thinks, but certainly there's been a big step forward in that direction.
Great, Paul, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Paul Hembry from Pirelli, of course, the tyre supplier here at Jerez, and testing is drawing to a close for this afternoon. I can tell you the afternoon session has been much busier than this morning. We've seen a lot of laps from McLaren and Red Bull and Ferrari as well. As they draw to a close, they'll get back in the garages, and the crews work through the night here to make tweaks to the cars so they can get another run out tomorrow, and we'll be back then for that as well.
Look forward to that, Rachel. Thanks ever so much. Now, it has been called the boxer's nose or the platypus beak, but what's the reason for the slightly unusually shaped front ends on virtually every 2012 Formula One car for the season ahead? Well, the Lotus technical director James Allison has the answer and explains the other major differences in this year's designs.
There are, of course, literally thousands of things underneath the skin of the car that are different from last year's car, but the visually obvious ones that everyone will see are the nose and the exhaust. The nose change has this rather unusual feature on many of this year's cars, where there is a very distinctive sort of duck-billed platypus feature on the nose. It's a result of a change to try to make the car safer. In the unlikely event, but nevertheless severe event, where a car hits side on to another car, then if the nose is very high, there's a possibility that the tip of the nose could come across the rail of the cockpit and hurt the driver in the other car. So, done for safety, but the rule only requires you to keep the nose low to about here. Beyond that point, it's perfectly allowable to raise back up to the previous level. And because there is downforce in lifting the underside of the chassis upwards, most of the teams have adopted an approach of leaving the chassis at the same sort of height as previous seasons, but lowering the nose to suit the rules. And that gives rise to that very unusual top deck. And then further back down the car, the other big change for the year is the exhaust pipes. Last year's car on every team was really designed with the exhaust at the very heart of the car. All of those designs had one common feature. They were using the substantial amount of energy that is available in the exhaust to energize the bodywork on the car and generate downforce. We decided as a sport that we would come up with a different rule for 2012 to allow the exhaust only to exit around about the middle of the car in this region. There's a box about that large, and you get to choose exactly where in that box your exhaust exits. The idea being that it's very difficult to get the energy of the exhaust down from that height on the car down to the floor where it can generate downforce. But the downforce that's generated is purely incidental. For Melbourne, I think pretty much every air-licked surface on the car changes, with the exception of the chassis and certain members of the suspension. But the rear wing, the floor, the engine cover, the front wing, the barge boards, the vortex generators at the front, the T-tray, pretty much all the clothes you see on the car now and on the track are going to change before Melbourne.
Well, Red Bull have adopted the new style of nose for 2012, but technical director Adrian Newey has denied it's flawed.
It's a further evolution of last year's car, which started as the RB5 in 2009, and so effectively it's the, I guess it's the great grandson of that car. biggest single change really was the restriction on exhaust exit position, which for us is a big change. We designed last year's car in particular around the side exhaust, developed the position that we ran through the year back in, must have been August of 2010. So the car's very much designed around that, whereas everybody else, I think, saw what we were doing and copied it, so they hadn't designed their car around it. That probably means for us it's a bigger step backwards than it has been for other people losing that technology.
And some clever journalists have found a certain hole in the step of the nose. Could you explain this? Is there some kind of secret?
No, it's not. It's simply for driver cooling. The regulations have dictated that this slightly awkward-looking step in the nose. So rather than having the driver cooling hole right at the front, we incorporated that into the step.
And will it be the magical car this season as well again?
Who knows? I mean, only time can tell. We know what we've done over the winter. We don't know what everybody else has done.
Now, the three-time world champion Sir Jackie Stewart joined us earlier from Jerez, and he believes Jenson Button is likely to do better than his McLaren teammate Lewis Hamilton this year.
They're very competitive to each other. Jenson Button's at an age now, probably the best window of time for a racing driver, for a man, really. And when you get to your late 20s to your mid-30s, I think your ability and your way of doing things have just matured. There's a big difference in 5 or 6 years of growing up, and Jenson Button's growing up. So I see him as a real player now. When he's on form, there's hardly anybody better. He's smooth, he's clean, he doesn't spin off the track very often, he's well controlled, and the little grey cells work very well.
Now, Kimi Raikkonen has laid down an early marker for the new Formula One season by setting the fastest time on the first day of testing. It's Raikkonen's first official test for his new team Lotus on his return to the sport after 2 years away. Well, the morning session started at 8 a.m. and first man on the track was Caterham's Heikki Kovalainen. The team completed 28 laps, but were pleased with their early performance.
It's really just a systems check, running with lots of fuel rather than looking at anything to do with performance.
And Heikki's out in the car for you today. What has his lap times been like so far? I mean, are you pleased with how he's gone?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it all depends on fuel levels and who's doing what. But from the point of view, he's very happy with the car. We've made some changes to the setup. It's responded very well, starting to get a good balance, and we're already quite a bit quicker than we were last year, so that's a good sign.
Raikkonen managed 75 laps in the Lotus and set the fastest time of the day, finishing 1/10 of a second quicker than Force India's Paul di Resta. Mark Webber was 8/10 off the pace in the Red Bull, who, like the majority of teams, are using the new style of nose.
Simply for driver cooling, the regulations have dictated that this slightly awkward-looking step in the nose. So rather than having the driver cooling hole right at the front, we incorporated that into the step.
For McLaren, with Jenson Button behind the wheel, they were over 2.5 seconds slower than Lotus in the morning session. But after a quick cup of tea and a chat with the engineers, Button was back in the car and managed to improve by a second in the afternoon session. Mercedes finished the day only 3/10 off the pace, but were using last year's car as they're still working on the design of their 2012 model. So testing underway. It all means
Kimi Raikkonen has laid down a marker for the new Formula One season by setting the fastest time on the first day of testing. It's Raikkonen's first official test for his new team Lotus on his return to the sport after 2 years away. Well, the morning session started at 8 a.m. and the first man on the track was Caterham's Heikki Kovalainen. The team only completed 28 laps but were pleased with their early performance.
Really just a systems check, running with lots of fuel rather than looking at anything to do with performance.
And Heikki's out in the car for you today. What has his lap times been like so far? I mean, are you pleased with how he's gone?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it all depends on fuel levels and who's doing what. But from the point of view, he's very happy with the car. We've made some changes to the setup. It's responded very well, starting to get a good balance, and we're already quite a bit quicker than we were last year, so that's a good sign.
Raikkonen managed 75 laps in the Lotus and set the fastest time of the day, as I said, 1/10 of a second quicker than Force India's Paul de Resta. Mark Webber, 8/10 off the pace in the Red Bull. They have a unique slit in the car's new nose.
Simply for driver cooling, the regulations have dictated that this slightly awkward looking step in the nose, so rather than having the driver cooling hole right at the front, we incorporated that into the step.
McLaren, with Jenson Button behind the wheel, were over 2.5 seconds slower than the Lotus in the morning session. But after a quick cup of tea and a chat with the engineers, Button was back in the car and managed to improve by a second in the afternoon. And Mercedes finished the day only 3/10 off the pace, but were using last year's car as they're still working on the design of their 2012 model. And Rachel Brooks has been in the pit lane at Jerez for us today, and we can now join her. Rachel.
Yes, it's the end of day one of this winter testing session in Jerez, and I'm very pleased to be joined right now by Christian Horner, team principal from Red Bull. And Christian, how's it been for you today after a bit of a frustrating start this morning?
Well, it's a bit like first day back at school, really. So we had a slight delay this morning. We had some components come in for the rear wing from the UK, and then there was some fog at the airport here in Jerez, so they got diverted to Seville, but they got here in time. And we've had a pretty good day. We've managed to tick the boxes in a lot of areas from a reliability point of view, from a point of correlating wind tunnel and CFD data with track data. So from that perspective, it's gone very well.
Where would you say you are compared to this time last year with the RB7? Are you at a comparable place, do you think?
I've got no idea. Last year we were in Valencia, this year in Jerez. That's about all I can tell you. But it's impossible to know where you are compared to your opponents. Fuel loads make a huge difference. If you run another 10 kilos, it can make 3 to 4 tenths of a second of difference. So we try to forget about the timings of the other cars. We're here to optimize these days, to focus on our own performance, and learn about the new RB8, about the regulation changes. The exhaust is a big effect for this year. We're just going through a learning curve at the moment, and every mile that you can get in pre-season testing obviously has a big value to it.
Yes, you say, as everyone's been saying, that the timings don't matter, but to see Lotus and Kimi Raikkonen being the fastest today, can you read anything into that at all, or is it just simply a case of it's not a concern or anything?
Well, it's nice to see him back, nice to see him, driving well. He's obviously not struggled to get back into driving a Grand Prix car, but it's impossible to know what they were running, as it's impossible for them to know what we were running, or at least I hope it is. It's the timings can make so little sense at this time of year. You can become obsessed by them. So from our perspective, we turn them off more or less. We'll look at long runs. We'll look at how a car's performing over a longer distance. But mainly we're focused on our own performance, wanting to learn about setup changes, configuration changes to the car, and for the drivers to get a feel and get back in the groove.
Lots been talked about the nose on the RB8. Can you talk us through your design of that, or the design of that?
Well, the regulation changes for this year have driven low noses, yet the cockpit, the chassis, has remained able to have a high chassis, and there's aerodynamic benefit that all of the teams that have adopted the slightly ugly shaped nose that have chosen to take. Adrian's done his best aesthetically to make the nose incorporated into the design of the car in a slightly more pleasing way by moving the air intake that's traditionally on the front of the nose to that step in the chassis, and so it's mainly for driver cooling. So hopefully it should keep our drivers a bit cooler in places like Malaysia and other hot races we go to.
And what's been the feedback from Mark today? How did he find the car?
It's been a positive first day back for Mark. Obviously, it's a couple of months since Brazil, but he's been training hard. He looks in good shape, and he enjoyed being back out there again, and had got itchy feet to get going. So he's had a good day, and he's now involved in lengthy debriefs of his views on the car and the different aspects of the car.
Well, Christian, thank you very much for joining us. I know you're very busy this evening as well, and the crews do work here through the night making tweaks to the cars. They'll be here for a long time, but we will be back tomorrow morning to see the cars go out on day 2 of this winter testing session in Jerez.
Rachel and Christian, thank you. Not long now to go before, and a reminder that you can see live coverage of every race this year, Sky Sports F1 HD, starting with the Australian Grand Prix on March the 18th. We'll also bring you live coverage and practice sessions and qualifying, while our team will be bringing you exclusive content and interview throughout the season. It's all on Sky Sports F1 HD.
Kimi Raikkonen showed he hasn't lost any speed after 2 years away from Formula One by posting the fastest time on the first day of pre-season testing. Paul di Resta finished second fastest for Sahara Force India, while Red Bull and McLaren had a slow start to the year.
Sunrise in southern Spain, and the Caterham CT01 emerges from the pit lane to get the 2012 Formula One season underway. Getting laps under their belt was the aim for all the teams, but it was also an opportunity to get a better look at their rivals.
I'm happy with what's happened today, and it's nice looking around also the other cars going around the circuit in different corners, and looking at the different ideas that people have come up with this year. Who knows what's right yet, but it's good to see a lot of different styles of racing cars out there.
Red Bull and McLaren were unable to make the most of the morning, with Red Bull having to wait for a part to be flown in, while McLaren took longer than expected getting the car ready.
This morning it took a little while doing all the system checks and what have you with the car, but then we could get underway and do some laps, and nice to do a 15-lap run near the end and with no issues at all, and to have reasonably consistent lap times this early on, so we can really get an understanding of aerodynamically how the car is working, and also how it feels from the cockpit.
Fastest today was Kimi Raikkonen, who showed that despite spending time away rallying, he'd lost none of his pace on the track.
It feels okay to drive, so it felt already okay after yesterday, so the new tyres, or this race tyre, seems to be a bit better, so not too bad.
But while it was a good day for Kimi and Lotus, Toro Rosso and Sauber both had breakdowns on the track. It will give their engineers working through the night something to focus on. Rachel Brooks, Sky Sports, Jerez.